Have you ever noticed that your period can have a smell you just can't ignore? Sometimes there's almost no smell at all. Then suddenly, you notice it. Maybe it smells metallic. Maybe it smells strangely earthy. And sometimes, after a few hours, it can become much stronger. But here's the part that makes this strange. The blood itself isn't always the reason. So why can something so familiar smell completely different from one day to the next? And what actually happens to period blood after it leaves your body? The answer starts with something surprisingly simple. Because period fluid isn't actually just blood. It can contain blood, tiny pieces of the uterine lining, natural fluids, and other material from your body. And once all of that leaves the body, the smell can start changing. But what causes that change? The first clue is something you can't see: air. Fresh menstrual blood can smell very different from blood that has been exposed to air for hours. And that familiar, metallic smell? You've probably noticed it before. But if air can change the smell, what happens when the blood sits around even longer? That's where things get more interesting. Imagine fresh menstrual fluid reaching a pad. At first, there may be barely any noticeable smell. But then an hour passes. Then another. Now there's warmth, moisture, blood, and everything else that came with it. And the longer it sits there, the more the smell can change. This is why something that barely smelled at first can become much more noticeable later. But there's another question. Why can the same period smell different on different days? Because your flow isn't exactly the same every day. Sometimes there's more blood. Sometimes there's less. Sometimes more natural fluid mixes with it. And sometimes the menstrual fluid stays on a pad or other product for much longer. Even the natural conditions around your body can be slightly different from one day to another. So the smell you notice on day 1 might not be the smell you notice on day 4. And there's something else that makes this even more interesting. The smell on a pad doesn't necessarily tell you what the fresh blood smelled like when it first left your body. By the time you notice it, hours may have passed. The blood has been exposed to air, it has been sitting in warmth and moisture, and it has been mixed with other fluids. So what you smell later is the result of everything that happened after it left your body. But now comes the part you shouldn't ignore. A mild metallic, earthy, or slightly musty smell can happen during a period. But what if the smell suddenly becomes extremely strong? What if it becomes distinctly fishy or rotten? Especially if you also notice unusual discharge, itching, burning, fever, or pain, that's different. A sudden, unusually foul smell can sometimes point to a problem that shouldn't simply be blamed on menstruation. So no, period blood isn't dirty. And having a smell doesn't mean your body is doing something wrong. It's simply a mixture that changes once it leaves the body. Air gets to it. Time passes. It mixes with other fluids. And the longer it sits, the more its smell can change. So the next time you notice that unmistakable period smell, remember, you're not simply smelling blood. You're noticing what happened to it after it left your body. And that's why something as familiar as your period can sometimes smell completely different.